Yes, we have Will Estrada with us today. He is a senior counsel for HSLDA, the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. However, he did begin his work for HSLDA in 2004 as a legal assistant. After graduating from Oak Brook College of Law and Government Policy in '06, he moved on to direct HSLDA's Federal Relations Department and serve as HSLDA's federal lobbyist. From 2018 to 2021, Will worked as a career federal employee in the Office of Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. After resigning in 2021, he was selected by the board of parentalrights.org to serve as the first full-time president of the organization and the Parental Rights Foundation. Then in 2023, Will returned to HSLDA, serving as senior counsel and contact attorney for HSLD members in Illinois, as well as California, Georgia, Maryland, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Tennessee, Wyoming, and Washington, D.C. He is a busy man.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
And Will is also a homeschool graduate from Pennsylvania. So we are very, very happy and excited to have you with us here today, Will. Did we get all of that information correct?
I think you got all of it. I think the most important thing is I'm a homeschool grad and homeschool dad, so it's a privilege to be on with you all today.
That's most important.
Yes. Well, we wanted to bring in some counsel because Rainbow Resource Center is located in Central Illinois. And we have actually started receiving some phone calls from concerned homeschooling families about some things that are taking place here in Illinois. And a lot of that discussion kind of goes over our head a little bit as curriculum consultants. And so we wanted to bring you in to kind of talk about some of the main points in this HB2827 bill.
Well, it's a privilege to be on. You all are doing incredible work. I'm a homeschool grad and homeschool dad, and back when I was being homeschooled, there were not really people like yourself to help homeschool families with what curriculum should I use, what support should I have with my child if maybe special needs or learning difficulties. And so from the bottom of my heart, thank you for what the three of you are doing and what Rainbow Resource Center is doing. It's very important, and it's been exciting to see I'd say the past couple decades, how the homeschool movement has really grown from where it was. When HSLDA was founded in 1983, homeschooling was actually illegal in many portions of the country. And we've seen just kind of unprecedented growth and success for the homeschool movement. We've seen homeschooling go from illegal to legal in all 50 states, and particularly since post-COVID, really mainstream across the nation when people are really just saying, this is the best opportunity for my children. It's best for little Johnny, best for little Susie, and it's a privilege to be able to defend families legally and then to work with people like yourself who are providing support, encouragement, resources, and really kind of on-the-ground training for families who are homeschooling. So Illinois, kind of background, for the past 75 years has had one of the best environments for families to educate their children. Illinois is one of 12 states where you do not need to check in with the government in order to educate your children. There are legal frameworks. The landmark case People versus Levison, which established homeschooling as a legal form of private education, that was 1950. And it also established some of the parameters for homeschooling. You have to teach your children required subjects. You have to make sure that they're receiving an education that's at least commensurate with what they would receive in the public school. And also, interestingly enough, People versus Levison established that if a family was challenged regarding the sufficiency of their education, the burden of proof was on the family to prove that they were educating their child with the required subjects and at least commensurate with the public school level. So when I testified against HB 2827 in March, at March 19th, that was the first time it went through the committee hearing, I said the bill was premised on two mistaken assumptions. The first one is that there are no guardrails for homeschooling in Illinois. That's not the case. And the second is that the bill is premised on the false assumption that children who are educated at home by their parents are at greater risk of abuse and neglect. And the reason I say that that is a false assumption is every peer-reviewed study has shown that homeschool students are actually safer than their public and private school peers. That's not a knock against public education. My dad spent 37 years as a special education teacher in the state of New York and the state of Pennsylvania. It's just really the fact of the matter. But kind of closer to home, as you three know so well, the reason why parents would choose to pull their children out of a public school or out of a private school and take on the responsibility and really, frankly, the hard work of homeschooling their children is because they love their children. It's a lot easier to have someone else teach your kids.
Yes.
But when you love your children, when you see them either struggling or being bullied or whatever the issue might be in public school, it's really from the heart that moms and dads and grandparents even are taking the time to homeschool their kids. So that's kind of the two mistaken assumptions that HB 2827 starts with. The biggest really red flag for me in the bill is how it makes it so easy for families to be referred for criminal prosecution. The first version of the bill said if you don't file this homeschool declaration form by August 1st of every year, you've got a 10-day grace period. But if you still mess up, then the child shall be considered truant and you shall be subject to the criminal penalties. That was really egregious language. Not one state in the nation has any automatic criminal penalties if a family fails to file a piece of paperwork. And it was really so kind of 0 to 100 that the bill was going in the direction of Illinois that even a lot of progressive Democrat legislators said, we're uncomfortable with this. I think it was best said by Representative LaShawn Ford in a press conference in Chicago, where he said this bill creates a pipeline to the criminal justice system for parents who just want to love their kids. And as a result, the bill did not have the votes. And then last week, they kind of brought a second amendment, which really rewrote HB 2827. That's probably the version you've got in front of you on your desks. And although they took away the criminal mandatory penalties if you don't file the piece of paperwork, it has numerous references to families being referred to the state attorney for prosecution. So it's good in that it would give lawyers like myself a better chance to be able to defend families in court. I think a lot of state attorneys would say, look, we're not going to prosecute someone. Maybe a grandparent passed away and they forgot to file their homeschool notification form. It changed what it's called now, a homeschool notification form. Now it's due September 1st of every year, not August 1st. But it's still, the fact of the matter is, it still would be one of the most strict laws in the nation. Instead of being the worst, it would probably be in the top 3 or top 5 laws as far as harsh penalties in the nation. But it still is just saying truancy is not failure to educate your children. Truancy is failure to file a piece of paperwork with the government. Another really concerning provision that the new amendment that passed out of committee last week includes is on page 40 of the bill. It says that if a family doesn't file their homeschool notification form, the county truant officer shall meet with the child or children to make an initial determination of whether they should refer to the state attorney. And that's pretty scary. Although in Illinois, truant officers don't have a gun and a badge, they are still law enforcement officers. They have the awesome and terrifying power of referring a family for criminal prosecution. And the new amendment to the bill says that they shall meet with your child. There's nothing limiting it to whether it's in the home or out of the home. So that's very troubling. Then the third thing, and then I'll stop talking, is the bill creates a new definition of what is homeschool. This was not in the first version of HB 2827. It's on page 3, and the plain definition of it says any education outside of the 4 walls of the child's home is not considered homeschooling. And when the ISB representative was asked about this at the hearing on Wednesday last week, the hearing officer said, yep, if 2 moms are meeting together for homeschooling, then they need to register as a private school. And it's not just filling out a piece of form to register as a private school. You have to be a nonprofit. You have to follow Title VI, the federal non-discrimination law. There's a lot of other requirements. We're wondering if some vaccination requirements or zoning or fire code or background check requirements would apply. And it would really chill the how homeschooling has grown. Learning pods, micro schools, co-ops, resource centers like yourself. And it would chill a lot of that. Kind of the ironic thing is the stated purpose of the sponsor of the bill is we want to get children outside of the home in front of mandatory reporters. And I'm kind of sitting here scratching my head like this is doing the exact opposite of what you've even said the purpose of the bill is.
Thank you so much for explaining all of that. And I think a lot of the concerns we have been hearing have been with one of those points right there. I have in chatting with some families just recently, some different concerns have come up. Is it okay if I just read some of those?
Let's fire through them.
Okay. I think there's been a lot of concern with that vague language of the truancy officer coming to your home, being able to knock on your door. Will they be meeting with the children alone? What will they be asking them? What if you get a kid who right then and there isn't real happy with mom and dad because you're making them do the math that they just hate or whatever. And it just leaves so much vague language that I think parents are very nervous about that, So one question was, if this were to pass, do we have a constitutional right to block a truancy officer's entrance into our home? And does that hurt our case should we be accused of truancy once it passes or if it passes? And then along those lines, if we are marked as truant in the state of Illinois, does that follow us if we move to another state with more homeschool friendly laws? So parents just kind of thinking through what would this mean? How could this affect us?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me read this section because it's really short and you really can kind of see firsthand how vague it is. This is on page 40, paragraph B of Amendment 002. So this is the version that passed last week and is currently pending on the House floor. It says the truant officer or county truant officer notified of a homeschool in violation of Section 30 of the Homeschool Act, and Section 30 is you have to file the homeschool notification form, shall meet with the child or children complained of and make an initial determination of whether there is cause to start a truancy investigation. So that's all it says. Shall meet with the child. Of course, compulsory attendance begins at age 6. So this could be your little 6-year-old if you forgot to file your homeschool notification form by September 1st. Let me kind of give you the background because we have about 4 states in the nation where there are very strict laws. These are New York, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. Illinois would become one of those. It would be now about 5 states in the nation with very, very strict laws. So the top most regulated states. But I always encourage families. I'm very hopeful we're going to beat HB 2827. But even if we don't, and it becomes law as written, families homeschool. Tens of thousands of families homeschool in the 4 highly regulated states: New York, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Rhode Island. I was homeschooled in New York and Pennsylvania, so it is possible. HSLDA vigorously defends these families. So all is not lost. We're not going away. We'll continue to be defending families. Of course, we're hoping and working towards defeating HB 2827. But the experience that we've gained is in those 4 states that we would then take into Illinois is that absolutely the Fourth Amendment is stronger than HB 2827. Of course, the Fourth Amendment to our United States Constitution, all 50 states, including Illinois, have similar provisions in their state constitution, but it also protects people in Illinois at the federal level, is very clear that no one can come into a home. Your home is secure unless the government has a warrant. Now, there's some exceptions. One is called exigent circumstances. If there's an emergency, that wouldn't apply in this bill. Not filing a piece of paperwork is not an emergency, but that sometimes applies when DCFS gets a report of abuse or neglect, for example. And then the other exception to the Fourth Amendment's requirement that a magistrate or a judge issue a warrant is if you give consent. And so what will happen if HB 2827 as currently written became law is the truant officer would come up to the door. He or she would say, I don't have a warrant, but we need to come in and talk with your child. And if you don't let me, I'm going to refer this to the state attorney for potential prosecution. And then a family has to make a decision. Do we let them in? Do we give consent, even though they don't have a warrant, in hopes that the truant officer won't refer it to the state attorney? Or do they just stay firm on their Fourth Amendment rights? I advise families all across the nation when we're talking with them about kind of their right, but also sometimes it's better to kind of get this resolved now. And families have to make that kind of scary decision right there with a government official on the door. Some families will actually have their child, again, no state has a law similar to this, So I'm more talking in the Child Protective Service, DCFS context. Some families will have their children come and just chat with the truant officer or caseworker at the front door or step outside. The mom or dad will stand there. But the way it's written, if a truant officer, these are under the Regional Office of Education, if he or she was very aggressive, they might say, you have to let me talk to this child by myself, or I'm referring you to the state attorney for criminal prosecution. It leaves a lot of leeway to the truant officer. This question actually came up, and Tara Costa Howard said in the hearing on Wednesday, I prefer to leave it to these individual government workers, and that's pretty scary, actually, because it means that there could be multiple different ways that regional offices of education and truant officers are handling this across Illinois with no set standard, and truant officers being able to, if they wanted to, bully families into doing what they want.
Interject for one moment. Can the way this bill is written, if you have filled out the form, is it still up to the Regional Office of Education or the truant officer? They can still show up at the door and say, I'd like to see your portfolio, or
Yeah, that's a great question. The first version of the bill was very open-ended. It had some language about any other investigation as needed, and really looked like the Regional Office of Education could come in and do a portfolio review at any point. It looks like this Amendment 002, that's the new version of HB 2827. It looks like they tightened it up. So the way I'm reading it right now, and of course a lot could change if it became law and made draconian regulations. The way it's written right now, if you were to file the homeschool notification form by September 1st, that would basically be the end of the matter. So it would just be families who didn't file that form or who forgot to file that form who would be subject to kind of the potential penalties and investigations. So that's one small thing that improved the bill from how it was originally introduced.
Okay.
So what happens then if the truant officer would decide that you're not qualified, or you're not doing your job, or your kids are, being abused maybe emotionally or whatever that is? Who ultimately makes that decision then? Would it be referred to CPS and then it would be in their hands? Is that how it would work?
Yeah, great question. So there's kind of two tracks. The bill only deals with educational neglect with the regional offices of education.
Mhm.
So if there was any allegation of abuse or other sort of neglect, emotional abuse, I think you mentioned, that would be referred to DCFS, and they would do a separate investigation. So this bill only applies to the regional offices of education under the Truancy Code in Illinois, having authority if the family doesn't file the homeschool notification form. And then if they were to find, well, we don't think you're educating your child, you would need to keep a portfolio, and that portfolio could be reviewed if a truant officer got involved, which it looks like is only if you fail to file a homeschool notification form.
Mhm.
The first version of the bill was pretty concerning. This one looks like all the regional office of education could do is refer it to the state attorney for prosecution. But it really opens the door to, you've got suddenly the government interacting with families who are loving, who are educating their children, but who solely may not have filed a homeschool notification form. And your question really raises a good point. If a child were to say something, if a truant officer says, oh, well, do you ever get timeouts that you don't like? Do you ever get a spanking? Suddenly, a family could have DCFS investigating and really be kind of on the hook for government involvement. And one of, I think, the really important things that has been discussed, particularly by our friends in Chicago, is that over the past couple of years, massive growth in homeschooling has been in the Black and brown communities, minority families. Some studies are showing that 40% of kids who are being homeschooled now are minorities. And we often see that criminal prosecution, government investigations are disproportionately impacting families of color. I think if this bill passes, a lot of wealthy families will not be impacted, and I think a lot of the government investigation will be on minority families, low income families, families where maybe it's a single mom who's homeschooling, who may be working one or two jobs to put food on the table, but who's like, my daughter's being bullied. My 11-year-old daughter doesn't want to live anymore. I'm going to homeschool her and maybe have a co-op involved to help with some of the education. And those are the families who are juggling a lot of things, who might forget to file this homeschool notification form who will suddenly be investigated by the government. And it really is very troubling because those are the families who um, love their kids and who are least able to have an additional thing on their plate. It's going to make the entire family suffer.
Or it could be like in my case in 2002 when I started homeschooling, our particular region, the Regional Office of Education, was really, they just really came after homeschoolers for a period of time. And I actually was advised, I joined HSLDA right away when I started homeschooling, thank goodness. And I was advised not to fill out, they called it back then a statement of assurance form. And because I didn't fill it out, a truant officer did show up at my door demanding that I go to court a month later with all my curriculum. And I contacted HSLDA right away. They sent a letter to them saying, these are my rights, and I never did hear from them again. But,
wow, so that's the sort of example, I mean, of what we do see. It has not happened in a while. I've had in the past 2 years only one family get a letter, like you said, and we sent a letter on behalf of the family, and they never heard anything back from the Regional Office of Education. If this bill passes, though, exactly your example, that's going to happen to a lot more families in Illinois. And you remember, I mean, that's kind of scary. You're trying to figure everything out, and then
and it's like, oh no, what is
you
going
something
on?
wrong already? Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I can already see families being dissuaded to homeschool because of the uncertainties and this kind of scary notion of my kid's going to get taken away from me if I don't do exactly to the T what they're doing, and that's really difficult to see as well when, they just want what's best for their kid, and they're understanding that the classroom environment might not be that option. But then with all of this turmoil going around, it is a scary notion.
what's really kind of sad about this is we actually tried to hire two Democrat aligned lobbyists. Both were very excited about this. They said HB 2827 is the conversation. We want to come on in, take you on as a client, and we'll go meet with Tara Costa Howard with you, and we'll try and lower the temperature and discuss what can be done. And both lobbyists wanted to take the job. And they said, we just have to kind of check a few things. And they came back a couple days later, just really dejected, and said, we can't take you on as a client. We've been told we'll never work again if we take HSLDA on as a client. And it really kind of irked me when the sponsors said in the hearing on Wednesday, oh, HSLDA hasn't offered any amendments. They know where we are. I've talked to the Coalition of Responsible Home Education, who are behind this bill. I've offered as well, because if they really wanted to kind of help get homeschoolers in front of mandatory reporters, the way to do it is not make an adversarial relationship between the local public school and the family. They could pass a law saying, and Pennsylvania actually has a law exactly saying this, that homeschoolers have the right to take one or two classes in the local public school if to. Pennsylvania's law gives homeschool families the right to take up to 25% of the school day in extracurricular, co-curricular, sports, career and technical education, and the public school gets up to 25% of the per pupil funding for that day. So it's been a win-win for public schools and homeschools in Pennsylvania. I mean, that would be the example I would float, instead of their coming in with the force of law of, if you don't do this, you're getting referred to the state attorney for prosecution. It's very perplexing.
Yeah, and you mentioned a little bit of some of the Pennsylvania kind of laws that's been kind of a rolling movement as we've seen this development of 38 other states have these rules and regulations and things. But how is HB 2827 different than some of these other states who do have laws in place?
Yeah. So Tara Costa Howard, the sponsor of the bill, is correct when she says that 38 states have some form of reporting. There are 12 states, including Illinois, where you don't have to check in with the government. You don't ever file anything with the government. You have to educate your children. You have to follow the law. Educational neglect laws are still on the books. Families can be prosecuted if they're not educating their children, but you don't have to proactively check in with the government. But she's wrong when she says that this bill is just like those other 38 states. The original one that said if you don't file, you shall be considered truant and you shall be subject to the criminal penalties, not one state in the nation had anything near to that. There are about 3 or 4 states, those highly regulated states that we talked about, where if you don't file, there could be penalties that could happen. But still, the whole 38 states, it doesn't apply. I think when you look at it, Amendment 002, probably you could say there are 3 or 4 states that are like this with this level of threats if you don't file. But it's still out of the mainstream. And really, the trend has been in the past 2 decades for states to remove regulations from homeschoolers. And this is not just red states doing this, this is blue states doing that. New Jersey has no filing, Michigan has no filing. Vermont recently rewrote their law. It was actually the Vermont Department of Education that came to legislators and to HSLDA and said, we want to work with you. This is too much hassle for us to be supervising homeschoolers. We actually just want to focus on public education. And it was really a win-win bill that went through that helped everyone, that reduced regulation. So Illinois would be the first state in the nation, really since the 80s, to go backwards when it comes to homeschool freedom.
That's really interesting. It's encouraging to hear that nationwide you're seeing that as a trend. What do you think then, Will, is really underneath this? Because if we're saying, okay, in Illinois, we want everybody to sign this form to register, I mean, what really is the goal of this then?
Because where is it originating, and why is Illinois being picked up?
And a form, I mean, how is a form itself going to keep any child from being abused? So I think there's a lot of misunderstand. People just don't understand, where is this really coming from, and why are we taking a step backward?
That's a great question. I've had people ask, is the teachers union behind this? And really, we've seen no evidence of that. In fact, many of the public schools and regional offices of education are actually very concerned about this bill because they're worried about the unfunded mandate. For example, DuPage County, one of the big counties in Illinois, they have about 700 active habitual truancy investigations. These are kids who are still enrolled in their local public school. They've not been unenrolled. They're just not showing up to school. DuPage County has 5 truancy officers. And I've talked to one of the truancy officers in Illinois, not in DuPage County. I don't want to identify which county this truancy officer is in. He said, we can't even keep up with the public school habitual truants. How are we going to be able to follow up with homeschoolers? The organization behind this bill is a nonprofit based in Massachusetts called the Coalition for Responsible Home Education. They are a pro-authoritarian, pro-government regulation organization. Their co-founder, Kieran Darkwater, was recently quoted on a podcast saying, I would wish that our laws in the United States were closer to Germany's laws when it comes to homeschooling. And of course, in Germany, homeschooling is illegal. You actually cannot homeschool your children. So I fear that the true motivation behind this bill is to regulate homeschooling with the intent of one day either curtailing it significantly or actually making it illegal. There's a Harvard Law School professor, her name is Elizabeth Bartholet, and in early 2020, she wrote a law review article saying homeschooling should be banned by the government. So it's a kind of ridiculous argument, especially when we think of our country's history of individual liberty and parental rights. But I think that's the true motivation behind this bill. One tragic thing is that Illinois is number 5 in the nation for deaths of children due to abuse and neglect. The states in the United States that are the highest are Texas, California, Georgia, Ohio, and then Illinois is number 5. There are almost 100 children who die every year in Illinois from abuse and neglect. And a study came out recently. There have been several investigative journalists who've written about this. You can just Google DCFS failures and it will come up. But one called DCFS an agency in crisis. One drew a link to almost 200 kids who've died in just the past couple of years who were known to DCFS. These are where they were either in foster care, which of course there's strict requirements of the families who are approved to be foster parents, or where DCFS had either investigated and closed the investigation or had an open investigation and the children had tragically fallen through the cracks. If Illinois was really serious about protecting vulnerable children from abuse and neglect, the focus would be on reforming DCFS, not going after homeschoolers. These are the numbers of kids where there's even some link with homeschooling, I think in the past decade it's been 6 or 7, whereas in those past decades it's over 1,000 kids died who are known to DCFS. And so actually, I'm not a demographer, but you can see that homeschooling is actually the safest way for children to be educated. When you look at the numbers in Illinois. So it's heartbreaking. These are heartbreaking statistics, but we know what needs to be done to protect vulnerable children. And it's perplexing to me that the legislators are going after homeschoolers instead of trying to reform DCFS.
Yes.
That's helpful. Thanks for explaining that.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of other questions. Part of the language of the bill, it sounds like, and you can tell us maybe we're wrong on this, but requires the parent to have a high school diploma, which that's fine. But what if you were homeschooled and don't have a public school diploma? Will the state accept that? Would they say, well, we have to test you and make sure that your diploma is valid? What if you grew up internationally in a different country's education system? It's not clarified in the bill, and it seems like there could be room there for discrimination at some point.
Yeah, that's a great question. First off, there have been several studies done looking at the academic credentials of homeschool parents, and the studies have shown that there's really no difference in the academic outcomes of homeschool students. They're all significantly higher than the academic outcomes of public school students on average, based on if you have a parent who has a high school diploma, no high school diploma, or a college degree. And really, that kind of speaks to the strength of the homeschool movement with support of co-ops, learning pods, micro schools, organizations like Rainbow Resource Center. There are so many helps today for parents that there's no statistical difference between parents who have no high school diploma versus a high school diploma versus some college versus lots of college degree, PhD. The one thing I would say is there are many reasons to oppose HB 2827. I do not believe that it would be used to stop second generation homeschool parents from being able to homeschool. And the reason is the bill doesn't say an accredited diploma. It doesn't say a diploma issued by a accredited public or private school. And the states that do have requirements that parents have a high school diploma, Pennsylvania, New York, Massachusetts, for example, other states, not one has ever used that law to try and say, oh, the diploma has to come from a public or an accredited school. So I don't actually believe that HB 2827 would prohibit people like myself who received a parent-issued high school diploma from being able to homeschool. We have seen a particular impact, and I'm worried that there would be a significant impact if HB 2827 passed on Amish and Mennonite communities, because sometimes they do not have a high school diploma. I've also talked with Hispanic families who recently immigrated from Mexico or from South America. They don't have copies of their high school diplomas either. So I think that's where more of the impact would be. I will say the good news is, at least in Pennsylvania, school districts have been reluctant to prosecute Amish or Mennonite families if they can show that they are working towards getting a GED. So this provision will definitely impact families, but I think it's one of the parts that will have less of an actual practical day-to-day impact on families if it were to become law.
Okay.
And
that's good to know.
that does bring me to a next question. And the amendment too, I believe it was, they had talked more about the co-ops, and like for high school, one of my kids got together with a friend of mine and we brought in a retired biology teacher and he did dissections with us. Would that be considered a private school, or like, the co-ops, are they going to have to become a private school, or?
So I think they would have to become a private school. Now that raises some other questions, which I don't really think the sponsors have looked at. And so that's one of the things that we would probably file a lawsuit on behalf of a co-op or a learning pod or a resource center if this bill were to become law. But, one deep concern I have is you have to keep a portfolio of your homeschool records. And so what would happen if a family's portfolio was reviewed and they did science, for example, in this co-op, and the regional office of education took an aggressive view and said, well, that was outside of the home. You did it in a co-op that wasn't registered as a private school. And even if it was registered as a private school, that's a private school, that's not homeschool. I'm throwing all of this out of your portfolio. Oh, and by the way, now you're in education neglect territory because you didn't do science. I mean, that's sort of where this very aggressive interpretation could lead to. And unfortunately, ISB had the chance to clear that up in the hearing and say, oh, no, if you're a co-op, then you don't have to register as a private school. We see there's a distinction. I mean, that was kind of a softball answer that he should have answered it that way. But instead, they gave a very aggressive answer of no, even 2 months meeting together would
Yes.
need to register as a private school. So we were floored by that response.
Mhm.
Because that would
That's
affect
crazy.
pretty
That's
much
very alarming.
almost everybody
Almost
anymore.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
Right.
the thing is, most homeschoolers anymore don't homeschool in isolation. They're part of a classical
Community
conversations or
somewhere,
a
yeah.
And it-
co-op of some sort.
And especially in high school, like I know what I'm lacking. Like I'm not a science person, so that's why I did call on outside resources to help out. So
Mhm.
or foreign language or whatnot. So that's we're
Yeah.
like you said, we as parents are doing our best, and we're trying to gather as many resources as we can to help our children. So
And that's a beauty of homeschooling. I mean, it's a feature, not a bug, and it's really good for students, for the homeschool community, for families. And so it's just really strange that they're going after that in HB 2827. I don't know if you caught this, but one of the Coalition for Responsible Home Education witnesses on the March 19th hearing, she's sharing her story, and basically she's a cult survivor. I mean, I'm listening to this story that she's sharing. My heart went out to her because this is, Branch Davidian, David Koresh, Waco level cult sort of stuff. And of course, tragically, cults impact everyone, whether public
Right.
school, private school, homeschool. But she's sharing kind of this story of isolation, and that's not what homeschooling is. And so for HB 2827, this new amendment to almost say, the only way you can homeschool is in isolation is just very, very concerning.
Yeah. And like you said, totally ironic since the whole goal of this is to make
Exactly.
sure that homeschoolers
Yeah.
are out there being seen. It
Yeah.
sounded like that was a big concern of Terra Costa Howard's, that we want eyes on these families, So then, this would cause us, like you said, to have to homeschool in isolation. So it really doesn't make sense at all.
No.
and it's almost asking more from homeschoolers because the bill requires more for us to show our curriculum or our portfolio. And the public school system, that they don't have to show parents their curriculum that they're using, but
True.
yet we're
Yeah.
expected.
I try not to make snide comments, but I sort of can't resist at this point. Tragically, the recent NAEP scores that came out showed that Illinois is doing very poorly. And in some schools, there's not a single student who was proficient. The stats show that 2/3 of Illinois public school eighth graders are functionally illiterate. They're unable to read or write at a proficient level, some of them not even at a basic level. And so rather than put homeschool families under the supervision of the public school system, I'm like, maybe we should just have homeschoolers supervise their local public school.
Yeah. Right.
I don't know if that would go anywhere.
Yeah. No, they might not like that idea. Huh?
But speaking of the homeschool families, though, we did see in early March an amazing turnout at the Capitol
Yeah.
of homeschool families showing up to voice, their concerns and to be a witness to the homeschooling community. What can we as individuals be doing now? Because I know there has been some movement, especially this past week with HB 2827. But what can we be doing as individuals and families to kind of voice our concerns and just make sure that we are being heard?
That hearing on March 19th, somewhere between 5,500 and 8,500 homeschoolers came out.
Incredible.
And the only reason we don't know for sure is we were given 3 different numbers that they shut down access to the Capitol. If 5,000 people come in, then one person said it was 6,000 people come in, and then one source said it was if 8,000 people come in. But regardless, there were 500 homeschoolers who didn't even get into the Capitol, and they didn't leave. They stayed outside listening to the hearing and talking to the legislators who came through. And that really has caught the eye of not just the nation, but the world. Times of India, which is the #4 most read English news outlet, covered a story about HB 2827. And it's because of the overwhelming response of Illinois homeschool families filing the witness slips and staying engaged. So we are not sure what's going to happen next with this bill. Technically speaking, it should be dead. The crossover date in Illinois was Friday. and the bill did not pass out of the House and go over to the Senate. In fact, the sponsor gave a speech on the House floor and said that she was going to be working on another amendment of the bill, which would then again go back to the House Education Policy Committee and have a hearing and witness slips and all of that. But first, they need to get a waiver from the rule, and so we're trying to figure out. The House is out of session for this week, for Holy Week. Jewish families around the world are celebrating Passover. Christian families around the world are celebrating Easter. And so they're in next week on Monday. The Senate is not coming in until the very last week of April. So they are running out of time to do anything on this. So what we're encouraging people to do is we've been making our voice heard with phone calls, and continue to reach out to your legislator, particularly if they have not indicated how they're going to vote on the bill. Continue to do it politely, respectfully, but let them know you love your kids, you're a homeschooler, and we don't need this bill that brings more uncertainty and even the threat of criminal referrals for prosecution to Illinois homeschool families. The voice of homeschool families, I mean, it's really shown it's not a Republican issue. It's not a Democrat issue. It's not black or white or urban or suburban, but it's all of us. And the passion and love that come out from homeschool families has really made all the difference.
Yeah.
Well, that's good to
Yes.
hear. And that was a question I had too, is so since this has been held on the third reading, I think there is some confusion about, well, what would have to happen next?
Yeah,
So
what
you're
happens
saying
next?
that they would have to get a waiver, or how would that, is that something that takes a lot of time?
Yeah, so it doesn't actually. The speaker can grant it, or there can be a vote, and they probably have the votes if they wanted to move the bill to kind of grant a waiver from the crossover deadline. Having said that, we're still hearing that numerous representatives have deep-seated concerns, particularly representatives in the Chicago area, who are saying we fear that this threat of criminal prosecution, referral to the state attorney's office, will disproportionately impact Black homeschoolers and Latino homeschoolers, and we believe that they will not grant a waiver unless their concerns were addressed. And so we're talking a third amendment. But then some of it is do the legislators have an appetite for continuing to hear from their homeschooling constituents? And so I think we'll have a better sense in the next week or two. But really, I think constant vigilance on the part of homeschoolers. If you've not yet reached out to your state representative and your state senator, just in case this does pass out of the House, now would be the time to do it. We had been told right from the beginning when this bill was introduced on February 5th that it was most likely going to pass the House and we would be able to defeat it in the Senate. And the fact that it has not passed the House has really shocked everyone. It's shocked the establishment in Illinois. It's not shocked homeschoolers, though, because we've always known that we are a broad community of people who are passionate about our children's education. And so the response of the homeschool community in Illinois has really been why this bill is still stuck on third reading.
Oh, that's helpful.
It is.
Yeah.
Can
Yeah.
you speak to this? I had read that there was a motion was made to have notes ruled inapplicable. What does that exactly
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah, so notes are a very helpful tool that members of the Illinois State House and on the Senate can do, and they can say, we don't think that there's been adequate discussion about the impact of this bill on public school finances or regional office of education, and so we want there to be a response. And interestingly enough, Amy Ellick, who's the ranking member in the House Education Committee, she put a note on the first version of HB 2827 that passed out, and ISB, they had initially said in the hearing on March 19th, oh no, there won't be any economic impact on us. Their response to her note came back and said, while we think we can basically follow the requirements of this bill with our current funding, we are concerned about the impact on local public schools. And that was part of why the new amendment came out. It removed the requirement that families file that homeschool notification form with the local public school. It moved it up to the regional office of education. So notes have an impact. Unfortunately, also, just a simple majority can waive a note, and that's what we saw on Friday. We had some concern that when that vote came through that they might actually try and move the bill. And so I was very heartened to see that notwithstanding them saying, nope, the notes are not applicable, we're going to hold off on the bill. That gave me hope that we may still have the votes to kill it in the House. But notes are helpful, but we see them kind of as a procedural tool, just waived by a majority very often. So it doesn't mean too much as far as where the final vote could be on the bill.
Thank you.
So for a lot of homeschool families, I know there's a concern that this, if it were to pass and become a law, it would be a foot in the door and that it would be a slippery slope in Illinois. So the question is, if the bill were to become a law, how easy is it then for a lot of that vague language to be kind of filled in with details that maybe wouldn't be so homeschool friendly? I think there's a fear of, if it passes, what are the steps then to change that once it passes? Is that a difficult thing to do, or is that not so hard to, go in and change it once it's already become a law?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are two answers to that one. The first one is HB 2827 includes on Section 80, this is on page 13, the following language. It says the State Board of Education may adopt any rules necessary to implement and administer this act. That is one of the most broad grants of rulemaking authority I've ever seen in any state or federal law. And so that's a very deeply concerning section in Section 80, that ISB has very broad authority to issue more regulations, which would have very, very limited oversight by the legislature, by the elected people. There is a standing committee made up of both House and Senate members that actually reviews regulations that come down, but they hardly ever express concerns. It's almost a rubber stamp on regulations. So that's why I never say there's no legislative oversight of the regulations, but it's very minimal oversight of regulations. That's the first concern. But the second concern is, as we've already seen with two major amendments and a potential third amendment, the supporters of this bill, particularly the chief sponsor, Tara Costa Howard, and particularly Coalition for Responsible Home Education, they've already kind of shown their hand that they want to have as many restrictions on homeschool families as legislatively they can get through. And so if HB 2827 passes, I fully suspect that there will be additional legislative attempts, maybe to require all families to show their portfolio, maybe to require standardized achievement tests. New York and Pennsylvania have standardized achievement tests. New York actually has quarterly evaluations that must be done for all homeschool families. Pennsylvania requires a certified teacher to review the homeschool families' educational portfolio and just their progress every year and submit a letter to the school district. One of the ways that families homeschool in Maryland is up to 3 times a year, the school district can do a portfolio evaluation. And so these are states with very high regulation. There's only a few of them, but I fully suspect that HB 2827 is very problematic, but I fully anticipate, if it becomes law, that it won't be the last stop. There will be other bills introduced in further years. And so that's one of the reasons of why we're urging people, don't let the camel's nose come under the tent. Oppose HB 2827. No new laws are necessary.
Yeah. And here at Rainbow, we don't just service people in Illinois. We're helping families around the world. We have lots of missionaries out there as well. But are you seeing trends across the nation with homeschooling laws? What are you guys seeing across the United States?
Yeah, so the biggest trend that we're seeing is what we talked about, a trend towards less regulation. The public schools are saying, look, we're struggling. We have budget issues. We don't want to have to supervise homeschoolers. And a lot of legislators are saying, why would we even have homeschoolers be under the supervision of the local school district or the State Department of Education? They're struggling to even succeed in making sure that kids in public school are proficient. So the main trend we've seen is towards less regulation, reforming laws to give greater freedom to homeschool families. Having said that, a new trend we've seen in the past year, primarily adopted by Coalition for Responsible Home Education, is to roll back the clock on homeschool freedom. A very dangerous bill was introduced here in Virginia that would have eliminated one of the ways that families homeschool. The bill was SB 1031. Just like in Illinois, It was Coalition for Responsible Home Education that was testifying in support of it. Thankfully, although the bill passed one committee, it was referred to a finance committee where it was killed on a 13-2 bipartisan vote. But then the second one we've seen is here in Illinois. So it does seem that Coalition for Responsible Home Education is trying to work nationwide to roll back the clock. It was very exciting to see their bill fail in Virginia, and there are pretty high stakes here in this battle in Illinois. If the bill passes, we're going to see them emboldened nationwide to try and roll back homeschool freedom. But conversely, if HB 2827 fails in Illinois, where by all rights it should have already been signed into law, it's hard to overstate just what a letting the wind out of the sails of CRHE and for those who hate homeschool freedom nationwide. So keep up the fight in Illinois because it's going to
There's a
have
lot to hinge on this
ramifications.
bill, then not just Illinois, but as a nation, it sounds like it could really have a domino effect.
No pressure.
No pressure.
Well, like you said,
We're doing our best.
Yeah, it's such a delight to see all the homeschoolers in Illinois come together, and which brings us back to HSLDA and just how you are fighting for us, and
yes,
and just
so appreciate that.
So many years ago, even when I began, it was just so reassuring to know that you were there. And could you talk to us a little bit about what HSLDA does for new homeschoolers that may not know about you?
Absolutely. So, specifically in Illinois, it was a privilege to represent the entire homeschool community and testify on March 19th. There's a great coalition in Illinois, Chicago homeschoolers, obviously ICHE, the ad hoc coalition. And so I was glad that I was able to share the limelight. And this past time, Chris Butler from Chicago testified. I hope we don't get another chance to testify, but if we do, I've told Jeff Lewis, who is one of our local counsel in Illinois, and of course the president of ICHE, that really Jeff should be the one to testify on that one, because it really is a team effort. We work very closely with all of the coalition, homeschool coalition, ICHE, the folks in Chicago, to protect homeschooling. But HSLDA is a nationwide, is an international organization. We primarily fight in the legislatures in all 50 states and, of course, in Washington, D.C., to make sure that not only is homeschooling free, but that barriers to homeschool graduates are removed. I've written several laws which have passed on bipartisan basis. One, Barack Obama signed into law at the federal level that made it clear that homeschool graduates could enlist in the U.S. Armed Services just like any other public or private homeschool grad. We used to have homeschool diplomas rejected all the time by the military, and that has been done away with since 2012. And so that's kind of the example of what we work to remove barriers to discrimination. We work constantly with U.S. Department of Education to make sure that it is very clear to institutions of institutions of higher education homeschoolers are eligible for federal student aid. And then we work as a law firm to individually help families like yourself, who back in 2002 received that letter from the school district. So we represent families. Obviously, if HB 2827 were to become law, we would aggressively represent families in court if they were challenged in their homeschooling, or if they had forgotten to file a piece of paperwork, or even if they didn't file that homeschool notification form. We represent families all around the country. I've had to represent about 24 families recently in California. These were almost all, only one was not Latino. These were Hispanic and Latino families who wanted to pull their kids out of public school. And the public school said, no, you can't. And we got involved and said, yes, you can. You have a legal and constitutional right. And so it's a privilege to be able to defend families both in the legislature, in Washington, D.C., in Congress, and in the courts.
We so appreciate what you're
Absolutely.
doing. We talk about you quite a bit.
Yeah, we
and you guys are such a great resource.
You are. Yeah. We know curriculum, but we don't know all the laws, so we always refer people to you.
Well, I know the laws, but I don't know all the curricula as well, so it's a great team effort.
Yeah. Will, I have a question for you that's really kind of just more about you. I'm curious. I know you were homeschooled. So what was your homeschool experience like, and what drew you to HSLDA?
Oh, man, that is a great question. So, like I said, my dad was a public school teacher. So we lived in Dutchess County, New York at the time when I became of compulsory attendance, and the law in New York had just passed the year before allowing families to homeschool. My mom was working actually on the beginning of the internet at IBM back in the late 70s and early 80s. And she gave up her career as a computer engineer to stay home and homeschool us. I'm the oldest of 8 kids. All 8 of us were homeschooled all the way through K through 12. And frankly, it was such a good education that I skipped undergrad. I went straight from high school into law school. So
My
I mean,
goodness.
I mean,
That's a great testimony.
other siblings went to traditional college and got degrees. Others went into the U.S. Armed Services. I have 2 brothers who have served their country. One in the U.S. Marine Corps and one who's still with the New York National Guard. He just got back from a combat deployment to Syria. And so I've seen firsthand the success of homeschooling. My wife and my wife's also a homeschool graduate from Virginia, and for us, we kind of looked at all the options. We have a very good local public school here in Loudoun County in Northern Virginia, but at the last minute, my wife said, "You know what? I want to try homeschooling. I'll just kind of do the first year and see how it goes." And it worked so well. We did the second year, and then COVID hit. And my wife kind of went from, yeah, let's see how it goes from year to year to over my dead body, will the kids ever go to public school? It has just been tremendous with both of our boys. We've seen, I love the line from the Irish poet William Butler Yeats that education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire. And so we've really seen that both in my own life, but then with our kids as well, kind of that love of learning with homeschooling.
Oh, that's really neat to
Absolutely.
hear.
Thank you. Thanks so much for
Yeah,
sharing that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah. It
You guys have any other?
took a little bit to get you here, but we're so happy that you were able to join us.
I wanted to be there in person, but it turned out I was an hour and a half away when I was at the Patch Homeschool Conference. I thought it was Peoria, but it was actually farther away from Peoria. So
I'm in the middle of some cornfields out here. We know.
So again, thank you, Will. We really appreciate your time.
Thank
this
you so
morning.
much for your time.
Yes.
thank
Appreciate
you.
that.
We're happy to welcome you back anytime.
I'll let you know next time I'm there in person.
Sounds
Yes.
good.
Sounds
Take care.
great.